everyone. Thank you all for coming today. Most of you we know. A couple of you are new here. My name is Penny Wright, and welcome to each of you. We run quite a few programs here at the library. Most of you come to many of them, but for those of you who aren't familiar with them, take a look at our table with some of our upcoming programs. We're pretty much finished for the month of August, starting tomorrow, the next day, but we have a September calendar. If you live outside of our library district and would like to get our newsletters, which come out every 2 months, join the Friends of the Library and you'll get every newsletter. So, today we're delighted to have Deborah Burns, whom I understand is well known to several of you. Deborah is a former Women's Media Chief Innovation Officer and brand leader for Elle Girl Metropolitan Home, Elle Decor, and Elle Global Marketing. As an industry consultant and founder of Skirting the Rules, she helps brands and executives reinvent themselves, and then she did the same with her own life through the process of writing this story. Please welcome Deborah Burns.
Thank you all for coming today. I'm going to look at some of the people I don't know, because some of the people I do know are actually in the acknowledgments of the book. And if I look at them, since mothers and daughters are an emotional topic, I may get tears in my eyes, and that's not such a good thing. But I want to acknowledge Shirley Katz, who has been a force in my life and in the acknowledgments, and a childhood friend who actually lived some of this with me, Kat Rosenstock. As I said, the topic of mothers and daughters is a rich one, and I was on a creative journey for about 7 years, so this book is not an overnight success, and it was a journey that had many twists and turns and starts and stops as I processed a very unique relationship with my mother. So this book was born 25 years after her death, and it began as a love letter to her. But as I began to write it, I realized it's really all about me. Maybe for the first time. I was an only child to an extraordinarily otherworldly beautiful mother. I was born in 1955 into the June Cleaver era, and my mother was anything but June. She was a magnificent woman who charted her own course in life, and she was a woman of mystery and secrets and power and some sort of innate authority that she carried with her. And I was her only child who danced around her pedestal very willingly, and always in a way that was full of longing, because my mother was hard to catch. She was elusive. And the title of the book, Saturday's Child, is because I saw my mother mostly on Saturdays. She, as I said, designed a life for herself that enabled her to do what she wanted to do. And I think when she had me, the domestic duties of taking care of a child were not exactly what she had in mind. So she got my father's 2 Italian unmarried sisters to come and live with her and she never so much as washed a glass again. They were responsible for my day-to-day, and it sounds like we were wealthy. We were not. And these four adults, my mother, my father, and my two aunts, lived in a one-bathroom apartment in Jackson Heights, Queens. But there was always something very aspirational about my mother, even though we were poor by normal standards, perhaps. She was so extraordinary. She was a celebrity in the world that she traveled in. And so I was like the daughter of this celebrity. I was of her. But I was also very different from her. And as a sensitive child, these are some of the things that I internalized early on for this woman who I worshiped. I saw her mostly on those Saturdays when we were in the city. She worked, and she had a very busy social world, and she kind of breezed in and out of our apartment like a VIP guest. And I was always on the hunt, on the chase, and always patiently waiting for her. And then in the summer, my father's family, the Italian side of me, my mother was a WASP. Her family was from England. My father's family owned the Canzoneri Country Club in upstate New York. His older brother was the lightweight champion of the world. And that side of my family was very well known for a time. He was definitely the Muhammad Ali, at least to the Italians, for the day. And in the 1930s, well before me, they opened the Canzoneri Country Club, and it was a scene. The book has been described by Forbes as Dirty Dancing meets Goodfellas. And there's a reason for that. And my mother walked into this scene after World War II as a farmerette. And she went upstate to pick apples because the men were away. And if you knew my mother, she definitely looked like she never picked any apples. I think she did it for one day. And then my father saw her, and that was it. And that one decision changed the whole course of my mother's life. So what I'd like to do is read two short scenes so that you could feel the relationship between my mother and me. And then I'll tell you a little bit more about the creative journey. And then, since that topic of mothers and daughters is so rich, also here today is someone who also ran El Decor, and very well, I might add. And she is here with her daughter today, who I'm meeting for the first time. So, and some of you have come up to me already and talked about that mother-daughter relationship, and so maybe we could open it up to questions and comments afterward. So in the summer at this resort, I was left there with one of my aunts, my caretaker aunts, for the entire summer. And my mother would come up on Saturdays, and I was never a second late anticipating her arrival. Back in the water, I kept one eye on my mother as I swam with all of the other children. Always holding a cigarette aloft, she'd laugh with the friends who orbited her, admirers who vied for proximity, seeking some sort of rub-off effect, or so it seemed to me. She seduced the world, and I was no exception. Once an hour, she'd pin up her tumbling red mane, tie a sheer kerchief around it, and come in for a dip. Everyone knew to stop splashing. She slowly submerged up to her shoulders and began to do her side stroke once around the circumference of the pool. That signature stroke was completely her, effortlessly gliding sideways through life without ever going too deep. After all, leaving the surface would wet her hair. When I was very young, our pool ritual was both a public and private gift. Before or after the side stroking, sometimes before and after, on a really great day. My mother would press her body down on the rope that separated the children's side of the pool and slide across. Scooping me up, she'd ease back over to the grown-up side, where it was almost as shallow but still felt as though you were entering a forbidden zone. She would bend her slippery knees so the water just reached her neck, and I'd climb on to face her, weightless, my little hands, arms, and feet sliding on her shoulders and legs. A smiling pause to build the anticipation, and then she'd begin her bouncing game. Ba-dum, ba-dum, she would sing song, ba-dum, ba-dum, as we bobbed and turned round and round together. Her breath, her closeness, her blue eyes on me as the cool water beaded on our skin was like nothing else. If I close my eyes, I can still feel that joy. And one other scene from the city, also on a weekend. We went to the Central Park Zoo when I was about 7. Being so close to exotic, wild creatures made my heart beat faster, and my mother, in a dazzling lime green suit with a silver fox collar, led the 3 of us into the monkey house. We had only been inside for a minute when an enormous gorilla with graying fur caught sight of her. He began to wildly pace and pant and issue the most guttural, rolling grunts. I had never heard anything like it, never imagined an animal instinct so frightening. I looked up to see my mother's expression, but she wasn't afraid at all. Her neck arched higher as she faced him, amused. He grabbed the bars of his cage and growled in a faster, higher pitch as he pulled at them in a frenzy. Pieces of dried grasses kicked up everywhere, and a burning stench, overwhelming despite the open doors on either end of the cage corridor, intensified the more he moved and spread it all around. Some onlookers began to chant, "King Kong, King Kong." More chimed in, "Beauty and the Beast, look at that, Beauty and the Beast," encouraging my mother to walk by his cage again and again and again so he would follow her. Agitated and pounding, the gorilla swung from one arm as he switched bars to keep pace, and everyone who had cameras hanging from their necks snapped away laughing. By this time, I had already realized that restaurants would hush a bit when we walked in, all eyes turning and trying to figure out who she was. But this gorilla had figured it out instantly. He knew her. I stood back as the primal scene unfolded, a silent witness to the undeniable truth of my mother's power and an event that would become one more nugget of Dottie lore. When everyone had finally had enough, I lingered to put my hands on the barricade. I stared up into the gorilla's eyes, and he stared right through me, as if I wasn't there. Aside from an exhausted glance as he turned away, there was no reaction. He didn't know who I was, apparently. You never intended it. You couldn't help it, I thought many years later. It all just happened because you were you. I'm so glad I can read some of those things without crying now. That's how I knew which scenes to keep in the book. If I cried so much when I edited them, I said, that's a keeper. So from those scenes, you can feel the relationship between mother and child, and that relationship continued into adulthood. As I said, she's been gone more than 25 years, and unfortunately my mother got breast cancer when she was 56 and was not one of the survivors. But this whole notion of you never intended it, it all just happened because you were you, is so much really a part of this story. And I think one of the reasons why it's resonating with readers right now, because they can put, even though my relationship with my mother was a unique one, there is no judgment in this book. I don't judge her, there are no recriminations. I present what the situation was, and it enables people, I think, to see the themes and the threads of it. Perhaps my mother was a tad narcissistic. And I wanted readers to understand her and to love her. This never started out to be a mommy dearest at all. And even though there were many revelations for me personally along the way that took me 360 degrees from where I began, at the end, the story is one that is optimistic and positive. And I believe that the relationship with my mother was something that I needed to process and emerge stronger from. And when you do a book in today's world, the writing does not stop when the book is done. In today's social marketing world, there are so many articles that I've had to write and features that exist now on Thrive Global or Parade and some of the other places that they've been picked up. And one of the articles, I forgot the exact title, but basically it is, I had a narcissistic mother and it made me a success. And, you know, certainly there's a downside to not feeling a priority, perhaps, or maybe fully loved. But my experience with my mother gave me many qualities that resonated well in the business world. I was very intuitive because I spent a lifetime trying to figure her out. And so whatever natural intuitiveness I had was heightened, razor sharp at her feet. It made me imaginative because I had to entertain myself as an only child, but I had to keep her entertained too because, you know, I had to be sure there was going to be a next Saturday sometimes, or at least that's the feeling that I had. And so much of this is a feeling. Many people have said, what would your mother say if she read this book? And I thought about that very carefully as I was writing it, because she's not here to challenge everything. And part of me feels like she would say, oh, Debbie, that never happened that way, or something. She would say something like that. But I think when she read the book, even though it's memoir, it's written like fiction because she lived a life that really was a story. I didn't have to search too far. I had to do some extra research, but I didn't have to search too far. She was the story. And then, as I said earlier, I realized it was about me. I started it by, oh, I'm just going to write a book about my mother's life, but as the writer, it's my perspective on my mother's life. And I think she would see that and be proud of the recognition. And, you know, I could hear her, if she were sitting in the room, she'd probably tell some of you, you know, my daughter loved me so much she had to write a book about me. You know? And so I think that ultimately she would be very proud. So, as I said at the beginning, this was a long creative journey. It started as a novel. I was a journalism major, so I could always write. But writing a novel or writing a memoir is a whole other kind of writing that I had to immerse myself in and learn. It's almost like changing pens or changing hands, because I'm trained for the headline. If I could write a book that's a one-page prologue, that would be my favorite thing to do, or to sum up an idea in a marketing way for people to be able to say, aha. But a book is a story that has to unfold. And so it was a skill set that I had to adapt to and learn and enhance. And that takes years. And just like life, writing is all in the editing. Any book in this library that you take out, you're holding draft 279 or 322, because once you get the story out, it's all in the finessing and the shaping of that story. And the novel that this began as was almost hiding the truth of the story. I distanced myself from it by fictionalizing it, and then even more so because I got the idea to write when I was in London, looking at portraits of women from the 18th century who were unconventional, and thinking about my mother, because even more than 20 years after her death, she was still always present for me. And I was thinking about, she's so much more beautiful than these women, and then I got hit like a thunderbolt. I needed to learn about these women, and I needed to write about my mother. And I became completely obsessed. And the phrase skirting the rules came into my mind, and because she had to skirt the rules her whole life. Other people made up the rules. She wasn't going to live by them. She had to navigate them. And so did these women in the 18th century who achieved in a time when no one expected anything from them. And I said, I'm going to write a novel, and I'm going to make my mother a fictional character and bring all these real women from history in. And so off I went on this journey, but it was one I had to go down, because if I didn't take that step of doing that story, which I completed, it wouldn't have led me to the literary agent who said, you know what, try memoir. And when she said that, I realized, oh my God, I really need to write the true story of the two of us. And I couldn't have done it 5 years before I actually did it. I had to go through that journey. So there are a lot of lessons about life. Nothing's ever lost. And lament nothing. I can't look at you anymore. I don't even know you, and you're already crying. All right, going to this side of the room. So maybe that's a good point to take some questions if you have any, or just some comments on the nature of the relationship between mothers and daughters. I never was ever angry at my mother. It's not that I don't have a temper personally. You can't have all of those jobs and not be able to be firm and to stand up for yourself in many ways, but I never had one with her. And as I wrote this book, looking back on the scenes of our lives and then piecing certain things together, I realized in many ways conflicting emotions, which is a very interesting topic for me. The good and the bad, the positive and the negative. I idealized my mother to such a degree that it took the process of writing this book to humanize her in a way, so that I could see her and us in a more realistic light. Yes.
I have a question
Penny.
related to that. I'm not that far along in your book, but you weren't very, very young when your mom died then, and she died at 53.
No.
So what happened, I mean, over the course of those years that you were kind of became grown up,
Uh-huh.
did that happen, some of what you're talking about? Her becoming sort of human, more human to you?
No, I was an adult version with her of my child self. I developed a way of interacting with her. I love humor, and I had the ability to tease her and have an adult relationship with her, but still I idolized her. One could say I might have been obsessed by my mother in an only child kind of way. And when there's, I don't want to mention, you're filming. I was going to mention a celebrity's name, and her daughter looks like her father and not her mother. And she's beautiful, but I understand what's going through that child's mind, because no matter how beautiful she is, she also knows I'm not that. You learn that early on, and then the question is, what do you do about that? And how does it affect you, and how do you let it affect you, and how do you emerge from a situation like that in a stronger way? But up until the point, my mother got sick when I turned 30. And I got married very young, and I just went on with my mother as friends. Now she was a friend that I revolved around in many ways. So we never had it out or anything like that while she was still alive, to answer that question. Yes, Tracy.
I love the book, by the way.
Thank you.
Whoever hasn't read it, read it. You'll read it in one weekend, because that's what I'm just curious, you mentioned you were never angry with her. I mean, because I know you, I found myself angry with her at times. I'm just curious, and also, you, from the time I knew you, at least, you were always so confident. So I guess my question is, do you think the not being resentful, not having that anger, still able to, be so successful and kind of walk around with confidence? Most people in that kind of situation, always in the shadow of their mom in a lot of ways, would certainly have, like, to me, usually manifest in low self-esteem and or bitterness or anger. Do you think, what do you think was the reason? Do you think it was because your aunts were so wonderful, gave you foundation, or, I mean?
It's a very good question, and I don't know if I have the answer for it 100%, because, in the work world, we're all nervous before we go into situations, but somehow, and I think it's because I'm an amalgam of 3 women with doses of my father, who was very gregarious, and he's another piece of this story. I could never tell her story without his, even though I stayed focused on what the point of this book was, which was a mother-daughter story. But my 2 Italian aunts could not be more different than my mother. My mother spoke of adventure and fearlessness and friends and parties and modeling, and my aunts spoke of chastity and food and just a whole, and somehow in this triangle, they're all in me. And when I became a mother, I became the mother that I had needed, which is a generational thing. My children need something else. If you gave my children truth serum and said, "Does your mother love you?" they would laugh. But they may have other issues. I made them feel like they were the priority. So The short answer is I did have confidence because I carried a certain, somehow like a gravitas that she had, that owned the table kind of thing, that like just a presence. It's not something that you can create, I think. It's just in you, and that's the her side of me. But there's also the aunts and the father. And I had a very kind of eccentric upbringing. And I believe everybody tries to be so perfect today. And in that perfection, you lose a lot of the nuances and the fun part and whatever. But in the early days, I mean, when we worked together, and we actually had the same job, you saw me later on. When I first started out, it was work itself that gave me a lot of reinforcement. When I could walk into a room or a conference room, and then when I had something to say, just watching other people listening to it, as if it was an important contribution to the meeting, those were like wake-up calls for me. And because I'm intuitive, I had like almost a leg up. I could get to the essence of people very quickly, and to situations and ideas because of that imaginative part. I was always, Tracy had me beat a couple of times with ideas, but I always could create something kind of like on the spot. And so people respond to that, and it's in the response that gives you and builds the confidence for the younger people in the room. It's all in the doing. It really is. Thank you. Yes?
I'm curious, your dad.
Yes.
What can you tell me about him, and how did he deal with your mother?
So that's a big question, and I don't want to give away any spoilers. But my father and I were part of the same club, and he was madly in love with her always, and he never quite lived up to what she expected from him. So we were very simpatico without even expressing it or realizing it. And actually, he became a bigger part of the story than I intended originally because they were so intertwined and because I loved him so much. But he was eclipsed by her in my life. I loved him, but if somebody gave me truth serum, I would say I loved her more. I don't know if that's necessarily the real truth.
I don't know if you loved her more, but you certainly idolized her more.
Can I ask you, have you read the book or you're?
No, I haven't.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I'm a psychologist and I'm listening to this.
I see a lot of nodding over there, yeah.
And
Yeah.
I empathize, and I know it's complicated because you are part of your mother.
Yes.
And because you are.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that confidence comes from it. But obviously, there were some coping strategies that you learned from your dad, maybe from your aunts,
Mhm.
but that made you, I mean, a mother doesn't raise a child, a family does.
Mhm.
And you had a strong family unit, and you got different messages from different people.
Right,
So it's very complicated.
right.
And, I think you understand that your mom wasn't trying to be mean, wasn't trying to be a bad mother, she was just who she was.
Mm-hmm.
And you recognize that, but
Mhm.
yet you are part of the whole family. And,
Right.
You're very complicated.
So, two things, Mr. Psychologist. One is that a few men, I just didn't expect men to read the book necessarily, but a few have read the book, and again, like on Instagram now, people DM and reach out all the time. And several men have said that the story is subtle because I lived in the world of gray with my mother. And, you know, this is not a memoir where I was chained to a radiator or we slept in a car or, like, none of that happened to me. I ate fabulous 3 meals a day because one aunt was a chef. You know, so none of that happened to me, but everything was subtle. This kind of world of gray. Is it me or is it her? And that's where most people live, in gray. If you have black and white relationships, phenomenal relationships, easy to decide what to do. Terrible relationships, easy to decide what to do. 80% of relationships, no matter which, are gray. You know, and so readers are able, and men are relating to the book because of relationships with their fathers who were successful, and they don't feel that they can measure up. And there were even some younger men in today's like millennial generation where they're reading it because they're getting something, it's resonating with them in some way at the end. So those were my 2 points to you, men and subtlety and gray. Yes?
I have a question. 2 questions, actually. Number 1, what did your mom do for a living? Because you said there was not that much money in the household.
So my father was a very creative person, and he was a songwriter. And because of the family's connections, I'm sure my mother thought, she married him when she was 18, so I'm sure my mother thought, oh my God, look at this. I've walked into this whole world. I knew there was something remarkable out there for me, and now here it is. And she became a star of that resort and that whole world. And he just never made it through that music matrix of the time. And he had some nightclubs with his brother Tony, who would lend his name, and he was a great maitre d', but he never made a lot of money. And he always was striving for something big. So she had to go and work. And coincidentally, the owner, when the Canzonaries sold the hotel to a new owner, he owned a steel manufacturing plant in Jamaica, Queens. And my mother went to work for him, and she ran this factory in Jamaica, went there every day for 5 days a week for 30 years, hated every second of it. Any longer answer to that would be one of the spoilers. There might be another twist to that. But
here's my question.
Yes.
The green suit with the silver fox collar.
Yeah.
People that don't have a lot of money don't wear green suits and silver fox collars.
Yeah, she always managed to have enough. And that may be where a couple of secrets are. Yes.
Coming from an Italian-American family myself, I'm curious, how did your aunts relate to you? The rest of them?
Everyone in my household was beholden to my mother. So now she has the 2 sisters-in-law in the house, but she is providing the roof over their head, the clothes that they're wearing, the food that they eat. Well, complicated. In the tiny apartment, one aunt had a cot under my bed. My bedroom was a half room, which was a dining room, converted. And my aunt had a cot under my bed, and she slept with me till I was a teenager, which could be why I'm still afraid of the dark. And the other aunt had a portable cot that came out of the closet every night, and she slept in the living room and then put it away in the morning. Both aunts got up before everybody else, so that when my mother got up, she would have time in the one bathroom. It was a very regimented thing. But my aunts never displayed or contradicted or talked about my mother in any way. One aunt, the chef, was very jolly, which is not one of my favorite words, but it really describes her. She was like a lovable, heavy-set, big-bosomed, happy person. The other aunt was much more cultured and musical herself, and privately bemoaned her fate. I was the child neither one of them ever had, but never said a word about it. And so they went along, and she had the ability to be the fulcrum of something, and everyone turned around her. Different from most Italian-American households, yes.
You mentioned the neighborhood of Jackson Heights.
Yes.
And in Queens, this is one of the most ethnically, financially, sexually diverse neighborhoods in the United States.
Today.
Yes. But even, I grew up in an adjoining neighborhood in Sunnyside, Queens.
Right.
And I traveled there all the time and knew it. And it was a very, very fascinating kind of people.
Mm-hmm.
Neighborhood with all kinds of people and stores. And do
Mm-hmm.
you think you were affected by those?
So all of that didn't happen. I grew up born in 1955, so I'm 63, and it was Italian and Jewish. All my friends were Jewish, every single one of them. And today, you feel as if you could be in India, or, I mean, there's not even an American store, but none of that was happening back then. So I fit in neatly and nicely, that kind of diversity isn't there. Yeah, hi.
On those Saturdays,
Yeah.
you still had to share your mother with everybody else?
No, we had alone time. Well, in the summers, yes,
Yeah.
because we were part of a scene. But every Saturday morning, I would wake up extra early, dutiful little sweet girl that I was, and I would sit on the sofa that she loved. It was an orange Chesterfield elongated sofa with a straight line toward her bedroom door, which was always closed. So depending on how late she was out the night before, you know, I'd just wait, I would be all ready, and I would just sit there and wait for the knob to turn, and then like the afternoon would begin. We'd go shopping on 82nd Street in Jackson Heights. We'd walk 10 blocks, and I would watch her try on clothes, and all the women would kind of coo at how fabulous she looked in this or that. And then we would have lunch at John's ice cream shop every Saturday for like forever. And I basked in that. I mean, it was fabulous. I had her attention. We would always compare our pinkies because they looked exactly alike. And we would measure, and that was like our secret kind of handshake of the day. Yes. In the mother-daughter vein, and I'd like to open this up as a question for all of you. I did a book event in New York City a few weeks ago, and a friend of mine came, a very smart friend, and she said, "Wow, you've really done it. You put your mother right back at the center of your universe. And because you wrote this book, now, every day for the rest of your life, you're going to be talking about your mother." And in all the twists and turns, and the whole path to get here, I never once looked at it that way. And it was like she smacked me with an awareness. And I really took my breath away. And I said, could I have done this all unconsciously, because how I'm wired, how I'm most happy is when my mother is at the center of my world. And no matter what I thought I liberated myself from, how I humanized her and changed, I'm right back where I started. And it's like a stunning realization to me. So, since I'm going to be writing an article on this, what do you think about that? Does anybody have a thought on that? Yes.
Well, I dabble in writing a memoir, and I have to say, a lot of the memoir involves stories about my mother. And they become very positive to other people, even though I had a very similar upbringing to yours. My mother was narcissistic, an artist, didn't follow the June Cleaver pattern, wore great clothes, beautiful, and it's very interesting because unlike you, I was much more confrontational as an adult, not as a kid. But when I write about her, people say, oh, you had such a loving relationship with your mother, and she keeps creeping in, as do my other figures of mothers in the neighborhood we lived in, because I always had these other surrogate mothers and a close relationship with my grandmother. But it's interesting because I thought, God, you're still talking about your mother? So it's sort of in you, and I definitely do that, and I think you're right. It's sort of reliving it, and your mother was always like sitting on your shoulder.
Yeah.
Because I see that, and I thought of that.
Yes.
Did your life change, or your feelings about your mother, or how you lived your life change after your mother passed?
Not right away. It was devastating for me. And there was like a void that had always been filled by something that was now completely gone. And I just thought that I did think about her every day. And in situations, I would always think about my mother. And as I said, even when I got the idea to write, it came because I was thinking about her in that situation. But my feelings for her didn't start to, I don't want to say change, but be more closely examined until I actually started writing the memoir. And then I realized it's my perspective. And so what is my perspective? What are my reactions to these scenes? What was I thinking and feeling? And that kind of opened this up. And I really did, and my feelings were shaken, I would say, questioned at certain points in the book because of revelations that came in. But at the end, and this isn't a spoiler, at the end, I come back around. So I love and honor her today as much as I did when I was that child looking at her. But I just see things, and I'm freer than I was. And yet, I put her right back at the center of my world. Now, yes, I'm holding the pen. The rules of the game have changed. I'm the one who's here and doing the talking. It's just fascinating for me, yes.
Do you have children and she's alive?
Yes.
How was she as a grandmother?
I have 3 children. The last one was born in the last year of her life, and so she was very sick and really couldn't even hold him. But I have 2 boys and a girl in the middle, and my oldest son, she was a poster child for grandmothers, which was also like another, not in a June Cleaver way. She would take off her jewelry and let him play with it. You know, she would talk to him. And since I have some people from my past here, my mother-in-law was opposite of my mother in every conceivable way, even more than my aunts. And when I had my first child, which was a boy, my mother-in-law was like, this is her only son's son, and if my son said, go on the floor, and I'm gonna step all over your face, my mother-in-law would just spread. And so somebody said to my mother, And of course, children respond to that kind of play and attention. And somebody said to my mother, aren't you a little worried that maybe he's going to love the other grandmother more? And she looked at the person and said, wait 5 years. And, you know, she was right. My son, you know, loved her. They played Scrabble together. They did. And she was very devoted. And for me at that time, and this isn't a spoiler, but when I had him, I was so in love. Now as an only, who always wanted siblings, I gave birth, everything was fine, and it's a son, like it was miraculous. And I was so in love, never had a day of any kind of postpartum anything, but about he was about 2 weeks old, and I was looking at him, and I burst into tears thinking, oh my God, now that I've had him, I've signed my own death sentence. Like if anything ever happened to him, I'd die. And it hit me. I don't think my mother ever felt that way about me. And so there was a period of time after that first birth where I had some private kind of revelations, things that I had kind of pushed below the surface and moved past, kind of bubbled up a little bit, and I had to find new ways to distract myself from that and push it back down again. But she was a good grandmother. Yes, Tracy.
What did your daughter think when she read the book? I mean, because it must have given her, you know, it's all.
So my sons read and heard the book after it was done. My daughter was part of the process about 3 weeks before I handed in the manuscript. She read it. She's now the fashion editor for Rue La La, so she has an editorial mind, and her comments were like beyond. I gave her a shout out at that New York event that the book became everything that it is, also because of her and her insights. And there was a part where she was involved at the end where she said, you know, we really need to go deeper here because there's a continuum. There is this mother-daughter story that involves the 3 generations. And I realized that I grew up under the shadow of my mother, and I had to emerge from that. But unintentionally, and this is why it's always good, never judge, never blame, unintentionally, through my career, I cast another shadow upon my own daughter, where she had a bar. That's going to be very difficult in today's world as corporations that hired us are melting away. And, you know, you're moving in a world from hundreds of thousands of corporations to millions of untethered people doing their own thing. The world is changing dramatically. And here she has this mother who took her to Paris as the L girl representing America, and you know, that's the life that she led, which of course she's very grateful for. It opened her eyes to things. But unlike my mother and me, there was a point in the writing of the book where she tells me that your shadow, Mom, is larger because you have it all and you did it all. And that was another big realization for me. Mr. Psychologist is nodding very authoritatively in the corner. And so I kind of treated it in a superficial way because I didn't want to bring family and those kinds of things in. And it was Elizabeth who just made me go back and go deeper into certain scenes that helped to round out that part of the story. She loves it. They're all very proud. I don't know what's going to happen with the book, but at the very least, it's a gift to the family, for sure. But she's in the same place again because, not every daughter has to deal with a mother who reinvents her life, once again, and now has written a book, and, the focus is on that. So I think proud would be the best word, but like anything else, there's always a little bit of this and a little bit of that mixed in. Yes?
The cover, the photo you chose, it almost looks like someone being driven by a limo driver.
Yeah.
Why did you pick that?
So, all done by my publisher. I had always envisioned my mother's face on the cover. And they said, no. You can put pictures of her in the book, but the cover has to tell the reader something about the story and evoke some sort of emotion.
But it makes it look like a wealthy family.
It does. It's more cab-like, but I was in a few limos with my mother as well.
Cabs, people without money didn't take cabs.
Yeah, I don't want to say poor like starving. We were middle class with a few extras that came in on the side. So yeah, and when I saw this cover, I responded to it and said yes to it because there was something about the young girl and the woman, that looks almost exactly like my mother, by the way, in that car, and we're together, and yet we're separate. And the daughter is kind of wistful and leaning in a little bit, and it just, for me, it captured something important to the story. Yes?
I'm curious about your husband. Did he also fall under her spell?
He did. He did. And when she died, he was there and he said, I feel like I lost my biggest fan. I never doubted he was on my side in the scenario, but you couldn't help but be captivated. It was just, she was a magnetic, charismatic person, as most narcissists are. I'm drawn to narcissists today because, they're more fun. They're more interesting. I'm just more aware. I feel you coming up.
So we've had some great questions here.
Yes.
But I think what we'll do now is that Deborah brought some books and we'll sit there and if some of you'd like to chat with her. I want to tell you this has been a really wonderful hour.
Oh, thank you
Very
so much.
interesting. Now, as I said to Deborah, I'm always like one book behind, so I've only just started reading the book, but I already can't put it down, and I admire you for doing this. And I think her book may be optioned for a movie, right?
Well, the Hollywood Reporter, which is the industry Bible that Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg read in the bathroom every morning, recommended that it be a movie or a series. And when you just think about the odds of that, there are 50,000 new books a year. Like, how does that even happen? And all that looped in my mind when I heard about it was, there's a line in the book where my mother says, I could have gone to Hollywood, Debbie. And it was like, I feel like I'm the completion of something through this. So miles to go, but it was just fun that it happened.
I don't think they'll be surprised because obviously this is your story, but you've tapped into such a universal area of concern for all of us. So I really think here's a Rogers moment in your life.
Thank you so much.
Thank you